Jim, as you know, former wrestler Marcus Bagwell is a male gigolo. His pro wrestling gimmick.
I actually spoke with Glenn Moore and Jerry the King Lawler on Dinner with the King podcast several months ago. They pumped up or pulled up the page with Bagwell's rates. He's quite reasonable, but I'm not sure it says he has a rate for like $3,000 for the weekend. But we were wondering, for the weekend, does he like come to your house and does he bring his own food and clothes and stuff, or do you have to feed him and clothe him too and entertain him or whatever? We're not sure about the whole thing.
Well, his pro wrestling gimmick is now his job. Can you think of any other former wrestlers whose ring gimmick became their future occupation?
Well, I don't know if it's the same thing, but unfortunately, Tony Anthony, the Dirty White Boy, did become a plumber after being T.L. Hopper, but that's only because they made him a plumber because they talked to him and his dad was plumbing and he had helped out with his father's business. Let's see. I know beforehand, Big Bubba Rogers, the Big Boss Man, was a prison guard at the Cobb County Correctional Facility.
That's beforehand.
That's beforehand. That's a good question. Who would have, after their wrestling career, actually become their gimmick?
I don't know. Was Buck Zumhoff's gimmick that he was a dirtbag, sleazy, creepy guy you want to keep your kids away from? Because that's the way I always thought his gimmick was.
Well, yeah, he pretty much came off that way, whether he was trying for it or not.
Yeah.
That's a good. That may have to be a research question. Let's farm it out to the cult of Cornette. Come up with a wrestler who not before his wrestling career, but after his wrestling career was over, became the same thing that his gimmick was.
Was Dr. Big Bill Miller calling himself doctor before he was a doctor?
No, because he did actually get a veterinary degree.
When though? That's the question.
Before he graduated college, he was a big time amateur wrestling star, collegiate star. Also, he was a shooter. So he did graduate Ohio State, I believe it was, or somewhere in Ohio.
Ask Buddy Rogers. What's the story there? Was Gotch and Bill Miller, two guys you do not want to mess with, and very different, but two guys you do not want to mess with. And was it in Ohio? They just locked Buddy in a room and said, we got to have a talk? Well,
it was in Columbus, Ohio, as I understand it. Columbus was obviously Al Half's territory. This was like 1962, and the Midwest, because Buddy Rogers based himself out of there quite often, because Columbus was easy jump to the Northeast, but also he could pick up, the Midwest and et cetera. And they booked a lot of talent out of Ohio in those days. Anyway, I don't know if it was specifically in a designated locked room. I think it was just the locker room. Gotch and Miller went up to Rogers because there had been some ill will, whether it be over push or promotion or finishes, or sometimes Rogers was known to take few liberties when he could say, oops, I'm sorry, it was an accident, and fuck with people. But they wanted to talk to him, and he apparently did not want to be talked with in that manner, and he tried to bail out. And as he was going for the door, was it Gotch or Miller that slammed the door? Do you remember?
I don't remember.
But somebody slammed the door, tried to keep him from escaping, and it slammed on his hand or wrist and broke his wrist or hand, and he had to miss some dates, which did not make the NWA happy. And so that was that whole bit. But there's been numerous stories that I have read, accounts of what the whole thing was over, but generally it comes down to push and finishes and Rogers, because Rogers also pioneered the tactic of taking his own crew around. And if Rogers came into a territory, because he was the biggest box office attraction in the business, all of a sudden he'd say, well, bring in Billy Darnell and bring in these guys and bring in those guys. And other guys would get their notice and would get bumped because Rogers got what he wanted. So there was always some ill will over something going on there.
How long after that incident in Columbus do you think it was before Gotch and Miller got congratulatory telegrams from Lou Thez? Thank you. I've been waiting years for this to happen. The guy's a prick.
But I don't know if Lou would have congratulated Carl Gotch, because he was always upset. In his book, he said that Gotch was a great wrestler, but he put his pride before business and refused to do jobs and refused to do business with so many people. And when Thez is saying that,
Yeah, it carries some weight.
But Gotch should have been. I mean, he ended up being the god of pro wrestling in Japan and an MMA pioneer. But he should have been a bigger name in pro wrestling. But he didn't want to fuck around with guys that couldn't hang with him.